Thanks so much for listening to the Wild Health Podcast. If you're a Wild Health patient, you might not know, but you have access to our referral program. This gets your friends and family 25% off Wild Health services. Just head to Clarity, and in the top right corner, you'll see Refer a Friend. Click there, and you'll be brought to a page with your referral code. Happy sharing. Hey, Carl.
Hello, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I feel like this is sort of your wheelhouse today. Whenever there's a controversy or a potential environmental toxin, we just like press the Carl button.
And I don't know why that is. I don't know.
You're a smart guy, and you've got you're good at looking into these like quagmires and coming out with something that like is at least marginally useful, I think.
I would like to think that I like boil it down to like, all right, here's what I like spend a lot of time like going into this stuff and getting into the weeds, and then I like come out and be like, all right, like hopefully I can simplify it a little bit. Or
I hope so, because I don't understand this at all. So
well, I mean, I will say that there's going to be some frustrating things, societal frustrating things.
Okay. All right.
Sorry.
Societal trigger warning.
Yeah.
Acknowledged.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we're let's just jump in. We're gonna get through this. Glyphosate. Doesn't it? It's just like it rolls off the tongue in a way that makes you kind of feel gross just saying it. Glyphosate.
Yeah. I feel like it's one of those words you could mess up though, and because you want to put a C and another S in there or something.
Yeah, pretty sure I wouldn't spell it correctly if I was just given free reign. But
Yeah.
to me, I could say my glyphosate knowledge ends at I don't know, Roundup.
Yeah.
Probably not good for you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're naming names of Monsanto. I mean, we can. That's where everything kind of ends up.
Definitely naming names today.
Yeah,
no
yeah.
question about
Somebody's probably coming after me. That's fine. It's hard to. I'm actually surprisingly hard to find.
Nestled away in the mountains somewhere. No one will ever find you.
I'll shave my mustache. They'll never know who I was.
All right. Talk to me. I know. All right. Glyphosate. What the heck is glyphosate?
So it's an herbicide that's commonly found in sort of agricultural and landscaping settings. So it's used to control weeds and pests, and it's often used on crops such as corn, soybeans, cotton, wheat. It's often sprayed in a lot of parks and like the side of the road and golf courses, and it ends up in the runoff in the water runoff system, ends up in your water system, and then also gets absorbed into foods and ends up actually in your food. And part of the problem is it's not something you can like wash off. It's in the food. And it actually, what it does, here's something I didn't know. So it actually inhibits the shikimic acid pathway in plants. I have no idea what that is, other than it prevents you making aromatic amino acids, certain types of amino acids and pathways, and it messes up. It kills certain plants, right?
Kills weeds.
Kills weeds. And what happens in humans, we think, is and there's going to be like a lot of possibly, or using words like we think or likely, or those sort of hedging words. But glyphosate gets broken down into these byproducts, AMPA and glyoxylate. And those are the most common ones that it gets broken down to. We think there's a toxic effect of those on people, although the research is not clear. But there's other byproducts it gets broken down to, such as formaldehyde, which is one of the lesser byproducts of glyphosate, but it is one, which I don't think anybody thinks that formaldehyde is a good thing in your body. And we know the effects of that, but we think that maybe glyphosate itself has some toxic effects. So what are the concerns associated with exposure? Well, a lot of it is around cancer risk, although there's other associations that people make. And so the main thing is cancer risk in non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and other lymphatic and affect your lymphatic system and cancers there. We think it has some effects on development in kids and as well as fetuses and reproductive effects, as well as some damage to your kidneys and liver. So there's some controversy here in what level or how much glyphosate exposure is bad and whether or not it's a carcinogen. So there's this international governing body, International Agency of Research on Cancer, the IARC. So they, classify glyphosate as a possible human carcinogen. Now, the EPA, the U.S. EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, disagrees. And so that's where some of the controversy is. And then also the controversy involves how much glyphosate exposure in some food is acceptable and where that data comes from.
Time out.
Yeah.
I want to get into that, but
yeah, we can unpack that. Sure.
Two big environmental agencies that disagree, or I guess one cancer agency and then the EPA disagree on whether or not glyphosate is carcinogenic. Now, that's because there's a bunch of animal studies that show that it's carcinogenic, and there's no human studies, or where's the controversy coming from?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is that it's done in different, it's done in animal models, and then there's not a lot of human research done on, and a lot of the human data is, not causative. It's like associative data, there's like an association here, maybe we see that, and we'll talk about that with some other health effects we think glyphosate may have, but there's not like a clear smoking gun per se.
Okay.
So the IARC is a division of the World Health Organization, and so I think there's some political differences there, and that is part of what this specific substance has actually been a little bit of a lightning rod in this discussion around whether or not it is carcinogenic. And
all right, I'm not a conspiracy theory person, but I'm just saying this is like a rabbit hole to go down.
Yeah. It's I think anyone who knows me or listens to me, I'm not much of a waffler. I'm kind of waffling a little bit here just because, I think there's some significant controversy here and very, I don't know, I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist either.
Yeah, there's no smoking gun is what you're saying.
Sure.
There's a gun that's warm, but it's not smoking.
Warm. Exactly. It's not actively smoking. There's there's handprints all over it, So what I guess the question is what are considered safe levels of glyphosate in your food? And despite not being carcinogenic, the EPA does say, hey, we don't want more than a certain level in your food. And what they say is, so they call it the maximum residual level, the MRL. And they put that as at 30 parts per million. And they look at a bunch of different crops at different times. The main ones that we talk about here is soybeans, corn, and wheat. But it's in all crops, but those are the common ones that are sprayed for that, with glyphosate. So the European Union puts the MRL at 20 parts per million.
Okay.
So one of the things I tried to go into, and I'm maybe there's somebody on this, that's listening to this podcast is clearly where they got this data. Where I struggled with this, and the question I have that I never got an answer to and just kind of threw in the towel, is I don't know where that data comes from. That, like, when I go down the rabbit hole, like, where did that number come from at 30 and 20, which is a significant difference, like 30 parts per million versus 20 parts per million. So two different agencies came up with two different numbers when they, decided to set a level that's acceptable. And I just, like, on a lot of these websites, it says we looked at the preponderance of data and came up with this number. So I was like, where's that data? Like, can I see some of that? It's unclear to me. And maybe there's somebody out there that knows that. Please, send it to us. Be happy to know where that research comes from and, to make that intellectual leap. I just, in the, couple hours I spent trying to figure that out, I could not come up with that information.
All right. So maybe they're arbitrary, maybe they're evidence-based, but there's an upper limit. So, like, is the the glyphosate in, like, I don't know, soy, like 19 parts per million, 22 parts? Like,
yeah.
Where's the exposure? Is it? Are you going to scare me like you did with dark chocolate? Or
I am.
Okay.
Yeah. So, like, so when you look at say soybean, so the USDA looks at soybean samples and they say, okay, like, they take random samples, it looks like, and then they say, what's the parts per million of glyphosate? And the average parts per million in soybeans is around 1.9 or 2 parts per million, which is, significantly less than the 30 that they cut, that they put the MRL at. But the range is pretty wide. I mean, it's as high as 130 parts per million that they found in some food samples, but the average was much lower. It was 1.9. But again, like, I have the problems where where does that come from? And then
in how big of a sample, right? Is that in, like, a serving size of, like, edamame? Is that, like, in one block of tofu? Like, what's the?
They actually put out a serving size, and with that, I don't have that data, like, right here in front of me. But they'll like, in so much, so, like, they have a parts per million, and they have
Yeah, you would assume it would be in sort of a regular kind of serving size, more or less, right? So, if you're eating something regularly, you're getting more exposure. If you're having larger servings, you're getting more exposure. So who knows where?
Right.
And there's no home test for you to go ahead and be like, what's the glyphosate in my food content?
Yeah, not that I know of. Like, I don't think there's any, like, home tests that do that. And same thing with corn. It was sort of around 1 or so parts per million. But again, big range there. And same thing with wheat. Like, so there's a big range there that exists. And then there's plenty of studies that look at other sources of food. So, like, and when you start to look at, like, processed food, it gets a little kind of all over the place, where there's studies that we can link in the show notes that, like, look at popular cereals and snacks and bars, and a lot of them have variable levels of glyphosate in them. Most of them are below the MRL. So of even the European MRL, but it's not zero, right? There is, and they also look at, processed foods, but then there's studies that look at, common foods, vegetables, fruits, dairy products. Sometimes, like, cheeses can be concentrated, actually. It depends on the source there. So organic cheese, like, you'll get, like, to make, depending on the cheese and how it's processed, you can get higher levels of glyphosate in there. But usually, almost always, just me being clear, like, it's almost always below the MRL. But it's not, it's not 1 or way, way, way below point. Sometimes you can see numbers of 0.00 parts per million in organic foods that don't concentrate glyphosate. But, there are definitely foods you're looking at that like certain fruits and vegetables and non-organic, especially corn and soybean, where you can look at it and it can be high,
Wow.
where I would consider it not great exposure. Sorry, Debbie Downer.
So basically, if you cut out processed foods and you don't eat soy, you're probably getting a relatively low glyphosate exposure, unless you're getting a ton of corn or wheat.
Corn, yeah, right. Which,
yeah. Or if you like going to parks or playing golf or doing anything where you're outside where Roundup is being sprayed all over the place.
I wouldn't lick the greens, okay? Like I wouldn't lick greens. Like it's just like, or like, I don't know, like the guys who are like kiss their golf ball or whatever when it goes, don't do that.
Okay.
Good to know.
Good to know. I'm usually throwing my golf ball on the rare occasion that I'm playing golf because I'm so frustrated that that's not much of a danger for me, but I'll keep that one in my back.
That your son is destroying you.
As usual.
Yeah. But so like other than cancer, there is a lot of talk of other like developmental issues that happen. So one of the common things that people discuss is the association between glyphosate and autism. And so there has been studies that suggest a possible link, but the evidence is really not conclusive, and it's really this is something that people actually are looking at in the association of. There's been studies published that show that kids with autism have higher levels of glyphosate in their urine than those without autism. But that none of these studies have shown a clear cause and effect. They're just associative, so association. So, and some of these studies have not been done well. When they look at the methods, it's kind of made them questionable, which is sort of hard. Like, I think if you're going to, my own personal bias, if you're going to be doing something like that sort of study and looking at a large, a big problem like that involves lots of money behind it, I think you got to have your methods super solid, right? But that's a own personal statement. And so there's autism. People talk about ADHD and exposure. There's sort of limited evidence on that. And there was a study in 2018 that looked at prenatal exposure to glyphosate in association with shortened gestational length and also increased risk of ADHD in children. Again, in other studies as well, all these are associative, not necessarily cause and effect.
And just a word on that. If you're not used to reading the medical literature, if kids with autism had higher levels of glyphosate in their urine than a controlled group of kids without autism, that is an association. If somebody's able to prove that giving glyphosate to a subject increases their risk of developing a specific outcome, whether autism or ADHD or whatever else, that's more of a causal link. You can easily think of an alternate causal link that would explain those same results. Not saying this is the case, but we know that there's higher levels of glyphosate in non-organic foods and processed foods. And if you had a subset of patients who were eating high quantities of processed foods, you'd expect them to have higher glyphosate levels in their urine. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's the glyphosate that's causing whatever the outcome is. It could just be exposure to lots of processed foods. So this is sort of why this area of research is still quite controversial and open for debate. All right, and it looks like the manufacturers of glyphosate have successfully snipped Carl's internet connection because he just froze and dropped off. So I'm just going to take us home here. Also, some evidence that glyphosate exposure may be linked to colon cancer, but evidence still evolving and ongoing debate among scientists and regulatory agencies about its safety. We kind of alluded already that the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is a vision of the World Health Organization classified glyphosate as a probable human carcinogen in 2015, but that this is still debated by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, that says that it's not likely to be carcinogenic to humans. So jury's still out on that. How can patients reduce their exposure to glyphosate? Well, don't use glyphosate-containing products, or take precautions like wearing protective clothing when you're out in parks or golf courses, etc. Organic or non-GMO food options are the best when possible. Can you check levels? Well, testing for levels is not a routine clinical test and not typically included in standard lab panels, mostly done in research settings or occupational health evaluations for people who have a high risk of occupational exposure, like farmers or farm workers. You could test through urine, blood, breast milk samples, but these are all, again, not really commercially available. So we'll put in a bunch of links to some of the research we've discussed. Definitely limiting exposure is probably your best course of action, and the jury's still out as to the strength of evidence on glyphosate and its associated health risks. But I, for one, definitely watching this closely and concerned about it, and would not be in favor of just taking in glyphosate without having a sense of which foods are higher risk for higher concentrations. All right, and we'll see if Carl ever surfaces from his exile. Hopefully, just a coincidence, and that he's still safe out there. All right, catch you guys later. Thanks so much for listening to the Wild Health Podcast. If you want more daily health education, be sure to follow us on Instagram, which is filled with health optimization how-tos, grocery shopping lists, guided breathwork posts, myth debunking, and so much more. You can find us at Wild Health MD on Instagram.